when I left, it was like 20,000 people. So it went from 500 to 20,000 in like
Wow.
3 years, and just like the scale at which they operated, the pace at which they launched new cities and new products was very breathtaking. And
Hey everyone. Today I talk with Amy Sun. She's the co-founder of Briefly.AI. And prior to that, she was the first growth partner at Sequoia, before which she worked at Microsoft, Facebook, and Uber. We talk all things working in tech, VC, and founding a startup, as well as lessons and tips for other founders out there. Enjoy. Amy, it's so great to have you here. I love to get started with each of our guests with getting a fuller understanding of what growing up was like for them and what their formative experiences were. So, would you share with us?
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's so
It's
great to
our
be here
pleasure.
with you
Yeah.
after a pretty crazy couple of weeks. And yeah, so I am the child of immigrants. My parents immigrated to Boston from China, after the Cultural Revolution. I was born in the US. I am an only child.
Yeah.
So take that what you may. And I grew up in the Boston area. When my parents moved to the US. They moved here with pretty much nothing. Came here for grad school. It was the only one of the only avenues to get a visa out of communist China at the time.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the dorms of Northeastern in Boston. We actually had 6 people living in a one-bedroom, and I was a baby
Wow.
at the time. So my grandparents were able to come out of China after, the Tiananmen Square massacre. They were able to get refugee visas, the US. My uncle also moved to the US after for grad school as well in Boston, and my parents and me. And so we all shared a tiny dorm for the first like years of my life, but I was very surrounded by love, and it was also very motivating for me, very formative. Even though I don't have that many memories of that time in particular, the fact that my family like gave up everything for me to have a better life in the US, just had a very deep impact on me growing up, and a really deep sense of responsibility to like take every opportunity, like take nothing for granted, and make sure that their sacrifices were worthwhile, and also just a sense of optimism, that you can make a better future for yourself and your children through the decisions that you make. That sometimes it does take, like, giving up everything that you've known, your whole life, and going, after your dreams, basically. So, definitely very much the American dream of, like, my parents coming, over to the US, but, it also instilled in me, like, a great sense of, like, optimism and opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. So we've talked about being an immigrant. I myself am an immigrant. And it's so crazy that you bring up that story because my parents, they met in grad school in Ukraine. And they also, it must be a thing about grad schools. They also lived in one room. And granted, it was just my dad, my mom, and my brother.
Mhm.
And I remember these, I wasn't here. He's 12 years older than me, my brother is. But I remember their stories. And like you, how you're describing the optimism, they always talk about how that was such a fun time for them. Like when they had so little and they were raising my brother and trying to make sure they could create a better life for him. Sounds like a lot of what you're describing in your experience with your parents and what they transitioned on to you. How did that experience then lead to your like interest in tech?
Oh, that is, a good question. So
How
it
much
isn't
time do we
like
have?
there's like I would say a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? It's like
Mhm.
like just like you knew, your parents knew that when they're all in that one bedroom apartment, that it's temporary, right? It's not like you're not gonna this is not gonna be your life forever. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of like the US is like you can make the future that you want for yourself, or
Mhm.
To some
Totally.
degree, there are a lot of limitations as well, but, that this like, that, you can affect change in the world, and I know that, the US is not perfect by any means, economic mobility is not equal amongst everyone in the US, however, it is better than a lot of other places, especially,
Mhm.
communist regimes,
Yeah.
in overseas. But, in terms of my interest in technology, like, growing up, technology was very much a part of my life. My parents, they were engineers, so I was exposed to it from a young age, even though they weren't necessarily
Mm.
software engineers, they actually switched into being software engineers, during the dot-com, like, sort of boom and bust. So
Yeah.
even though I was a child, I was like I remember, like, the heyday of, like, the dot-com, like, how exciting that was, and then I do remember it all coming down as well and, like, the layoffs and, like, the sort of subsequent fallout, but then the sort of rejuvenation of technology again, with much more real products, real business models, and I found it to be so exciting. I think it had a lot to do with when I, um, went through college and grew up
Yeah.
as well. It's like the iPhone came out in while I my, like, first year of or, like, senior year of high school, first year of college, like, that year, and I just remember how exciting it was, like, my friends camped out in front of the Apple Store and, like, watching, like, yeah, just, like, it just all of these new technologies were truly transforming the way that I live my life as, like, a normal person, and I think I was especially impressionable, like, during those times, this is my, like, high school and college experiences, and it just made me wanna be a part of it. It was, like, that very exciting, like, "Oh, like, it's Silicon Valley, things are happening there, like, it's transforming the way that we live." Like, I was living in Seattle,
Yeah.
when and I grew up in Boston, did not have a car, when I was in high school because our school didn't even have enough parking for the students. So, like, public transportation was how I got around with me and my friends when I was in high school. And in college, we were also, in Cambridge. So we didn't, the
Mhm.
cobblestone roads, there's also no parking for anyone. And so I didn't really get to drive growing up. And I remember moving out west. My first job after school was at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And I realize that it's actually very hard to, like, get around a city with Seattle without a car. Taxis only go so far, and, the public transit system wasn't great. And I just remember, like, when Uber came out, it, like, just fundamentally changed my own life from such
Mhm.
a like, I all of a sudden, I could, like, go places outside of downtown and, like, not have to worry about not getting a ride back. Like, I didn't never have to worry about missing my flight, which actually used to happen a lot because the taxi
Right.
was, like, go up. And I was like, "Wow, like, this really
Is
it's crazy how it's just yeah, it's like internet and software, but it can just
yeah.
have, like, such a big impact on how we live our day-to-day lives that it was an industry I was, like, very excited to be a part of.
I totally feel everything you're saying. It's wild how much they're changing our world and what a time to be alive. And then
Mhm.
right now we talk about ChatGPT and I know that your company right now is in the AI space. So much to talk about here. Okay, so let me give folks some context. So you grew up in Boston, you went to Harvard, and then like you said, you moved to the West Coast. You started out your career at Microsoft, and then I also know that you worked as a PM at Facebook and then Uber, so did the tech route. And then you became the first female growth partner at Sequoia, and we're investing in startups. And today you are the co founder of Briefly.AI, which you'll share more with us. You still invest, you're a mom, you live in Austin. So, all of these things going on, but would love to get started briefly with just your experience in tech. So, working at Microsoft, Facebook, and Uber, and what you learned specifically with the lens of what it is, what it means to build something from scratch while you were in these larger organizations.
Yes, yeah, happy to give you the sort of brief version of, my tech career. So I knew I wanted to get into not technology, but I was not an engineer by trade. I did not, study computer science. Microsoft had a wonderful program for, like, product marketing managers, and, did not require technical background. Was also very interested with what Microsoft was doing. I mean, their software was a part of my life for
Yeah.
basically as long as I use computers, right? And, yeah, I think that was also part of why I got into technology earlier. It all happened while I was growing up, right? We went
Yeah.
from, using those, like, Apple green kind of computers to laptops like MacBook Air when I was in
That
college.
you
Like,
can
what
take
what
with you on the plane and even work on the plane with it. And then when we don't have internet on the plane, we get upset when it's like we're literally on these flying chairs doing work.
Oh,
We
yeah,
like
like, I
need
do
that.
feel like I was talking to like, it's no I'm not okay, I'm dating myself, but I don't think I'm that old, right? And but I did use floppy disks when I was
Yes,
in
me too. I
yeah,
used
I used real floppies.
yeah.
It was really hard to get a paper that you wrote at home to school. That's like if you
Yeah.
wanted to keep working on it at the school library. So, yeah, so
Times have changed,
it's
Amy.
very crazy. So I moved to Seattle, worked on Microsoft, Windows, like the launch of the Surface tablets. But I think I realized then, I was like, wow, this is like a really big company, and then I
Yeah.
definitely felt the lure of like Silicon Valley and startups and like working on small teams and building something that grew really quickly. And yeah, and Uber, as I mentioned, like it's just a product that personally changed my life so much. So I just dropped my resume to Uber and, like, hope for the best, and, like, they did give me a call, and, I ended up being one of the first, members of the like, I guess, one of the first growth marketers, at the
Nice.
company. It was a new team that was just being formed. The growth team was, like, an extremely new team as well, and for Uber, the challenge was that they were launching peer-to-peer ride sharing for the first time. So up until that point, all ride sharing had just been black cars and like licensed drivers, like limousines, and like Lincoln Town cars. You remember those? And they were for the first time, like anyone could get on the platform and drive other people around. And the challenge was like, how do we create this change in behavior? How do we convince people to
Right. To
like
trust
drive
this
strangers
random
around?
driver
Exactly.
with your life. I remember
Oh, yeah,
that.
and to, like, stop doing what you're doing and turn like, instead of working at McDonald's, why don't you just drive strangers around in your car?
Right.
And, that was, like, kind of the challenge posed to the growth marketing team, and literally my first job at Uber was posting jobs on Craigslist. I would make, like, thousands of Craigslist posts across all these cities and, like, copy paste them,
Mhm.
and actually they worked for drivers, so, then I ended up doing a lot of other things because the company was growing so quickly. It was about 150 people in San Francisco and probably 500 people globally at the time that I joined. And
Mhm.
during those few years that I was there for like 3.5 years. It scaled to being the sort of global like company that it is. I
Yeah.
think now it's probably like when I left, it was like 20,000 people. So it went from like 500 to 20,000 in like
Wow.
3 years, and just like the scale at which they operated, the pace at which they launched new cities and new products was very breathtaking. And I think that's a memory, like that memory of working there, and like the people that I met, and the people who are still like my very good friends today or my teammates today.
Mhm.
Um, I'll remember like that experience forever as like an extremely like formative one in my
Yeah.
career, like a time where I learned probably the most about startups and, what it
Yeah.
takes to scale a company.
I have
Um,
to ask, Amy, you bring up the breadth of scale that they were
Mhm.
able to achieve in so little time. We talk about some of like going into a new market, into a new city, and just starting to operate on it. We know Uber had to deal with various governments, local governments, et cetera, things like that. But huge scale that they were able to accomplish definitely changed our lives. What things, or like one to two things, do you feel like were so important in achieving that at that stage while you were there?
I think one thing that is very different about Uber's business and, like, say, Google's business is that every city has to be launched separately, and the fact that you're doing very well in one city doesn't really impact how well you'll do in the next. So, like, that pace of growth is not just like "Oh, it's on the internet and it went viral and it's going, like, really well." It was, like, a very deliberate, planned, like, execution game. Like, you have to go like, every city has to be launched. Like, every like one has to be executing at 100% in that city. Like, every city has different regulators, every city has different like dynamics with like the drivers and the riders and like the different maps. Like there's like weird nuances like Boston. Like Boston has this like huge underground tunnel that's, like, under the ocean. It's under the Boston Harbor, and that, like, ruins the GPS. So there's, like,
Yeah.
all these, like, weird intricacies of every single city and that you don't really realize. Like, oh, like, credit card penetration isn't great in South America or in, like, a lot of African countries, people don't use addresses the same way they use in the
Mhm.
US. The maps are all different. And so, like, all of with all that in mind, I think just, like, empowering each individual team with all of the tools and metrics that they need, but, like, holding them to, like, the same universal standard and creating that system of incentives was something I think Uber did a phenomenal job at, and I don't really think I've seen replicated anywhere else, where every, like, local team was basically operating like their own business, but they were held accountable and there was a system of like incentives across the whole company such that everyone was able to operate independently but like hold themselves to this higher standard at the same time because I don't think it would have worked if they weren't empowered fully, right?
Mm.
If like the San Francisco model was like copy pasted to all these other cities, it just wouldn't have worked. um so actually being able to be like, "You know what? Like, local person who's, not on the
Yeah.
C-suite in the Bay Area, like, I fully trust you to own your own P&L." And the P&L was kind of the way that they were held accountable, right? Like, can your city be profitable? Can you grow? Because like, that's how they get more resources from HQ. So I think that that was, like, a really like, different but important move that Uber made, that and then as a result, I think there's, like, been so many amazing entrepreneurs that came out of the alumni network, and I think that's part of it, like, so many individuals were empowered at that company to think about, like, their businesses from end to end. You weren't just, executing on a sliver of a feature, like, you were owning a business.
It makes me think about trusting your employees with more, and allowing them to take on more will allow them to rise to the challenge. But I'm sure there's so much more to dig into there.
Yeah, it's a combination. It's like you give them the responsibility, but
Yeah,
you
but you
also
have the
hold them,
tracking.
like, extremely accountable,
Yeah.
and I think, Travis was, like, very, very good at that of, like, if you aren't performing,
Mhm.
then it
You're
people
out.
know, he knows, and yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to hear about what you learned there while you were there, but
Mhm.
you I don't know if it makes sense to talk about your experience at Facebook first and then what you learned in tech in general.
Yeah, so Facebook was very different. I joined because I was very interested by AR and that set of technology. So I joined the stories team to build out that product. So it was still a new product at the time,
Mhm.
and being part of that team was also very fun. Like like a net new product within the family of apps at Facebook that is all video and augmented reality and just like a new format, but also extremely different than working at Uber. And it also kind of made me realize, for all the flaws that Uber had, like, sort of from its rapid scale, it's like,
Yeah.
not every company has all the answers. Like every company does have its own fair share of problems. Like it's just really hard to operate at that level of scale and without any sort of
Right.
like, large, crazy challenges, but that was a very fun product to build, and also, like, it kind of was, like it was very different than, how to scale a product at Facebook was very different than Uber, and it kinda made
Why
me
was that?
like
Was it, like, structurally? Because I know Facebook used to have a more flat org. Was that
it's the
different
nature of
from
the
Uber's
product.
siloed?
I think it's very much the nature of the product, so with Facebook, you can just be like, "I'm going to ship this product to, like, 50% of users," and it would go to a billion people, right? Versus at Uber, if you were like, "I have a feature and I wanna roll it out," I have to go and talk to all of these cities, like, make sure
Mm,
that the driver operations managers, like, know about this new product, how to, like, that the drivers are trained on it,
makes
like, you
sense.
see it and they know how to deal with it. It's just because every city is so localized, the product is so operationally heavy. It's not like, "Oh, you could just, like, ship this and then everyone will know exactly what to do." It has a very real, like, human impact in every single city. So, like shipping something very big, like, for example, like Uber Pool. Like that that product team had to go out to all these cities, like train these people, like really understand how like the kinds of problems that could arise, like how to deal with, how to train drivers, how to talk to riders about it. Like there's just so much like complicated
Yeah.
human sort of aspects of moving humans around into the world versus with Facebook, like you can just like make a video about how to use stories and then it'll appear in people's apps and then they'll either use it or they won't and like, oh, it's a new filter, it makes you look like a cat or something. And
Yeah.
it it I was like, oh wow, it's the scale of software is pretty amazing. And then all of a
Right.
sudden, you know, a billion people are
Using it.
you like it's in their app, right? And all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, we have like a," scaling
Mhm.
from like scaling from 1,000,000 to 100,000,000 is much more just about like the quality of the software.
Right. And I imagine that potentially allows Facebook to iterate pretty quickly because they get such a huge sample size on any feature they want to test.
It is amazing, like, what they built in terms of internal, like, A/B testing. Like, I guess anyone can be having a extremely different version of the app at any given time because, like, every team has access to, like, all of these. Like, it's
Cool.
basically tests, like, "Oh, like, maybe I'm in a 1% test for, like, this new feature, and I'm in a, like, 10% test for this other feature," and, like, every team and you can see the impact it has on everything else. So
Yeah.
they've done a really good job in terms of the testing infrastructure and making sure that you
Yeah.
can turn things off and on really easily.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that you learned autonomy and creativity at Uber in that like market go to market type of role. And then at Facebook, definitely lots of testing, iterating quickly. What
Mhm.
else? What else would you say you learned?
See, I was there for a shorter amount of time, so I was there for only a year. But yeah, like, and then just, the scale, like, the global scale of Facebook, it's,
Mm,
like, even great Uber had a lot of scale, but, like, Facebook really like, the number of users there and the retention between users is just
yeah.
extremely, high.
Was there any difference in the culture of the companies?
Oh, there was, and I left Uber at a time where, it was, like, a very turbulent time in terms of the
Mm,
culture, right? It was there's a lot happening in 2017 that
okay.
led to a lot of executive departures,
Right.
including Travis and, like, the, like, sort of issues with the board and everything like that. And, honestly, having also worked at Facebook and Microsoft, I think Uber was, like, unfairly targeted, for like, it wasn't as bad as it like, and I will speak to my own experiences, right, and not
Uh-huh.
everyone else's experiences, but it like, the culture was intense, but it wasn't like, negligent, and it wasn't, like, sort of, orders of magnitude different than any other tech company, I would say. Even yeah, as and I've seen a lot of tech companies now. And so, yeah, but I would say the culture because Uber had a very operationally heavy business, I think that and it also has very thin margins compared to, like, a software company like Facebook, which is has a lot of social media market share, like, they can afford to have, more well,
Less
things are
hostile.
changing now, but they
More.
could afford to have a lot more, teams working on similar things or, like, a lot of
Right.
products a lot of experimentation with things that didn't necessarily end up, like, making it into the product, or even if it did make it into the product, like, it was kind of like, a nice to have feature, which is for Uber, I think the margins are much more important, and especially, now that they're a public company, just, like, very like, optimizing things, like, pretty ruthlessly.
Yeah. And again, like to your point, sometimes things get unfairly judged or unfairly scrutinized, like with a super detailed lens. I think it's tough in any situation when someone is scaling a company or a team is scaling a company so quickly. There's only so much like you're constantly evolving and growing, and sometimes mistakes do happen. Not to say any of the sexist or offensive or hostile things, not to pardon those, but I think folks are learning too as they grow, and there are nuances that I definitely am not aware of in that
Mhm.
situation. Okay. Would love to talk about your experience in VC, which is completely different. What led you to explore VC and investing in startups, and how was your time? What was your experience like?
So, it was a bit of a, like, accident, I would say, that I ended up in venture capital. I love working in product, so I career-wise, I started off in product marketing. I switched into product management, while I was at Uber, was also product management, at Facebook, and I really loved that job. Like, I loved, like, working with designers and engineers and other product teams, like, talking to customers, like, trying to figure out what we should be building and, like, helping the team actually get it to market and seeing its success. And I thought that that was, like, the path that I was gonna take for my entire career. I knew I did want to be a founder at one point, and I was like, "Oh, product management very makes a lot of sense, as a pathway, to that." And venture capital kind of like I I didn't even know what, like, venture capitalists really did, I would say, like, for the most of my career, but I was approached by someone, who worked at Sequoia, and they were looking for an investor that had product and growth, experience, which to join the growth stage investing team. So I started talking to them, and I honestly did not know why I was talking to them. I thought that they wanted me to, like, advise their portfolio
Yeah.
companies or something, um, and they were like, "No, we're looking for an investor for our team." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've never really invested." You know what I mean? I have a Robinhood account. I'm like, yeah, and I didn't really have any money at the time, right? And yeah, and so I started talking to them, and, like, I honestly, I'm still surprised. I, like, ended up getting a job on the growth stage, investing team, and then I dove right in, and I was, like, so in the deep end. I, like, had really like, I don't think I had a very deep understanding of exactly how it worked when I joined, the team, but it was such a good learning experience, I would say.
Yeah,
Like,
I
just
bet.
diving right in and
Yeah.
just starting to talk to, like, all of these companies, like, meeting, like, the most amazing founders, learning about industries I knew nothing about, but,
Yeah.
like, had to become an expert in, like, a week.
Yeah.
And so it was, like, very,
Like
very
drinking from
interesting.
the fire hose, but
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. That was, yeah, made some investments while I was there, and, like, the team there was also very great, and it was yeah, it was very interesting, experience, but it kind of like, it is very far removed from building things and,
Mhm.
like, building, technology, and I do think I really miss that
Yeah.
aspect 'cause, I would say, like, investing is a combination between, like, a sales job and a, like, investment, yeah, like a hedge fund job, right? It's very
Mhm.
similar to like, it's much more similar to those functions than it is to, like, actually being a
Building.
founder, and I missed it. Like, I miss, like, being on a team, like, figuring out what kind of product to build and, like,
Yeah.
creating designs and, like, jamming and getting something into the hands of customers and, like, measuring how it does and, like, and I think that but I do think that the just be like, understanding venture capital and, like, having been in that seat, like, really did help me, like, understand, like, what kind of company I wanted to build, and it just exposed me to so many different types of startups,
Mm.
and so many different types of founders.
Yeah, and they say try everything at least once, and you tried it and learned that, this isn't what you wanna be doing
Mhm.
long term, but you definitely had your lessons while you were there.
Yeah, I think just being exposed to the wide array of, founders and, companies was, like, very inspiring for me personally. Like, it's like, wow, that's, like, who I want to be like. I
Mm.
want to be like, "Oh, the founders that really took a shot and took a risk and, did something really, really hard," and, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I think one thing that's like, common misconception about startups from the seat of venture capital or just from the seat of the bystander who's, like, interested in technology, but not, building a company for themselves, is that the story goes something like, "Oh, well, you have this person and they have, like, a deep problem, and it just sits with them, and then they build, they have this moment of clarity, and they're like, "Aha, like that is the product." And then they go off and build it, and it works, and they're off to the races. Um, I realize now, after I talk to a lot of founders from the founder side of the table instead of the VC side of the table, that that's not really how it works at all, and that a lot of founders just, like, try a whole bunch of things. And, like, the experimentation, like, the scientific method is, like, what is, like, the important thing to finding success, more so than, like, this sort of, like, personal problem plus, like, headstrong, like, need to, like, see that one thing succeed, and, like, yeah, a lot of the products that are very successful now, like, are the results of, like, rapid iteration more so
Mhm.
than, uh, like, this moment, this, like, aha moment, and that's something that I didn't learn until I actually started, the company, um,
Mhm.
and yeah, and so briefly, like, we use, AI to create, like, meeting summaries, follow-ups. We automatically write your follow-up emails for you based on the transcript and the summary, so you can save a lot of time. And I spent a lot of time taking notes as an investor. I would take notes, like, during the meetings, and then, you have to follow up afterwards, right? So there's a lot of, like, ju who did I meet that week? And, like, oh, like, what, like, there's it's just hours of, like,
What are the
sending
takeaways? How
emails.
do you make this personal to them?
Exactly, and, like, how do I remember all the key things that were said during the meeting? And, um, yeah,
Consultants,
and
all the consultants that are listening can relate to this as well.
yes, basically, and, like, how can we make this as easy for you as possible, and just, like, with the click of a button, like, automate all your follow-ups and have a record of everything that you've done, in that meeting, and all the key insights that were said, like, grouped by topic, so it's, like, very easy for you to read. So that's what we're building it briefly, and I could say that, like, "Oh, this is because, like, I personally had, like, the most pain with note-taking." Well, it was true, I have. But it's also we also tried a whole bunch of things, and,
Mhm. I love this part
yeah.
of your story. You guys pivoted.
Yeah, we did, and I'm not, ashamed, and I think I'm very
No, of course.
glad that we had the experiences building the other products, like, grateful for all the customers that, gave us a shot, but
Mhm.
ultimately, like, I think you have to make a decision about, like, what kind of a bit like, is this a business or not? And I think by building a company, like, I think you can only really learn this by, like, actually trying and, like, building a company. It's not about like, you can kind of get caught up in what a startup is, but in the end of the day, like, you need to build a business. Like, you're building a business, like, it has to, like, generate more cash than you're spending, and, like, it's very easy to get caught up in, like, stuff that you think a tech company is, but you're like, "Oh, like, we need to have like, these are all the things that we need to have, like, this is what our leadership team looks like, and this is
Mhm.
what, our brand is, and this is what, our all of these all the things that you're like, "Oh, these are the things that I think make up a company," but at the core of it, you just need to, like, build a product that people are willing to pay for, and
Yeah.
they have to be willing to pay for it more than, like, you spend, like, building it and selling it. And it's like, if you don't have that, then what do you have? I like,
Totally.
what is this collection of people working on a project? It, like, becomes like a project and not like a real company. And so I think learning that I think it's very easy for first time founders to get caught up in kind of the idea of what a startup
Mhm.
is. Um, but to like and somehow that, like, takes them a little bit away from, like, the sort of dire need to, like, build a business that produces cash flows and revenues.
These are great points you're making. I
Mhm.
think founders all need to take a really hard look in the mirror to your point of, are you creating a product or a service that people need and need enough that they want to pay for or are using? And there's this great book, The Mom Test, about how to
Oh, I
go
love that
about
book.
doing customer interviews. And most people are very nice to you and are saying all these lovely things. Oh, yeah, I would use it. But will they actually pay for it? And when it comes down to it, do they actually need your product is super important to get to the bottom of. And then the other point that you made of like needing to pivot, and so many found like absolutely not something to be ashamed of. It means like changing your mind is smart. There's like Adam Grant has a book about it. Go read
Mhm.
this book, How to Change Your Mind. And Albert Einstein's quote, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I would say pivoting is kind of the extension of what we described, like really going after who are your customers? Do they need this? What else would they need? And how do you tailor your product offering to serve them best? Maybe it's a different way in which you're serving them that makes it easier for them, or maybe you're providing so many added features that they didn't have before but needed. But just figuring out that pivot. I'd love to talk about your pivot. So I and it's a tough decision to make, to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, this isn't working, we're going to change. I know lots of folks also struggle with needing to tell investors. But again, hopefully, if you have great investors and you have open communication, you can bring them along with you on the journey. Or maybe that's not the best decision for your team, et cetera. But just for founders, I know so many founders are going through it, and it's a normal thing to go through. Would love to hear your story of how you handled your pivot and any lessons or tips for folks.
Yes, and so we started off the company building a video coaching platform, and
Right.
this was sort of in the height of the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
And so the sort of thesis was that a lot of like these in-person like coaching businesses would move online, and that the best way to do that at scale is like you could actually provide personal coaching at scale for the coaches if you had it an asynchronous coaching platform. So the way that it worked was we built this like video platform where you could send videos of yourself to the coach, and the coach could like add voiceovers and annotations on top of the videos to like give you feedback on how you're doing. So you could actually watch a video of yourself alongside this expert feedback, and that's like how you would get better. And yeah, I loved the product. Like it was like a great video product. Like I myself got better at a lot of things I was working on, including like my squats and my headstands, like to the platform. Um, but ultimately, like it like was very hard for us to make unit economics work, especially, as things returned to in person. We just saw like the demand shift away from digital, like way back to in person. And all of a sudden, like, customer acquisition, like, became very difficult, and it was like all of a sudden we had to pay for customers, but we our take rate was not that high, and so, like, the economics of the business, like, all of a sudden became like, it just didn't make sense, and I
Mm.
learned a lot from that, and I would say we did a lot of things wrong. Like, we built way too much before we actually launched the product,
Tested.
and we and I think I had this, like, fear of, like, rejection or, like, fear that it wouldn't work out, and so, like,
Mm.
we ended up, like, sort of building it in stealth for too long versus but, yeah, the thing I learned from that is, like, that is only, like, sort of delaying the thing that you need to learn. Like, you need to learn, like, as a startup with, like, limited runway, you have to learn as quickly as you can, and by not getting your idea out there for validation, then you're just not learning as quickly. Because of course, everyone like the mom test, like
Yeah.
everyone that you talk to is gonna tell you your idea is good because they don't wanna hurt your feelings and tell you your idea is bad. It's like you wouldn't tell someone their baby is ugly. And like but,
Yeah.
like, but, like, when you ask people to pay and they don't pay, then that's the truth, right? That's, like, the real and you need to get to the truth as quickly as possible. So, like, one thing that we're doing differently now is we're, like, shipping products before they're built rather than
Yeah.
the opposite. That rather than, like, building for a while and then releasing it, because then you get the real like because building a product is easier than selling a product. And if you can figure out a product that you can sell, then that's the harder thing, right? Um yeah, so I think that validating that you can sell the product before you commit all this time and money to actually building it and figuring out what to build is the better strategy.
Totally. And what I'm hearing too in that, and it's something I think we all feel, is fear of failure. But
Mhm.
what we need to do is reframe this relationship of, you know what, I may ship this product, you know what, maybe it's not ready, maybe I'll be a little embarrassed, but I'm going to learn something. It's an opportunity for growth and just really getting in developing a close relationship with failure and seeing it in a positive light as opposed to a light of this might hurt me, etc. And all entrepreneurs, it's a work in progress, so it's a very normal feeling, and I don't think anyone is born not afraid of that feeling, so it's a very normal thing.
Yeah, and it's like something I think that it's almost like conditioned into
Mm,
a lot of people, including myself, to
yeah,
be a little bit afraid of failure. Like, but it doesn't. But yeah, like the adage, like you miss all the shots that you don't
yeah,
take. Right? Like
yeah,
prolonging it will do nothing for you.
yeah,
Like you might as well learn quickly than learn
yeah.
slowly.
And it's also our body's protection of us, our bodies, it's our mind's way of trying to prevent us from dying, which is where this all came from. So again, it's very normal. Like I feel it, you feel it, this and that person, it's a very normal feeling. And
Yeah,
we just
back in
need
the
to
day, it was like, oh, should I go and attack this buffalo? If I
right. And now it's just
Yeah,
shipping
yeah,
your
we'll just
product.
launch some software,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be the end of the world, like, it's
Yeah.
just software.
Yeah.
That's
But
something I remember what like, my first boss, actually at Microsoft told me. I guess I was, like, super stressed about something, I, like, literally don't remember what it was, but I was, like, very stressed about something, and she was like, "We're just selling software." Like,
yes.
it's not like someone's life, it's on the line. I know you talked to Sanan earlier, like, literally
Yeah.
people's lives were in his hands, right? And it's like,
Mhm.
that's not us. Like, we're just selling software. And it's different for different products. Like, I think the stakes were higher with Uber because 'cause you're moving humans through space, right? Like, you were
Right.
like, "Oh, like, these people,
Right.
like, there are lives that are dependent on our software."
Mhm.
And sometimes there aren't, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Totally.
so
And maintaining a healthy perspective.
yes.
Amy, another topic I'd love to chat
Mhm.
with you about is the ruthless prioritization that's necessary as a founder. And then on top of that, you have the amazing perspective as a mom founder. And I'm sure this is also a work in progress. Nobody's born out of the womb knowing
Sure.
exactly how to ruthlessly prioritize. And it's a journey for each of us. So, would love your perspective of what you've learned.
Yes. I mean, so as your resources are very limited at a startup, it's not like a company like Facebook where you have like sort of unlimited time and unlimited resources to like figure things out. Like you have a very limited amount of money, limited amount of people, and so you basically can test one thing at a time, and just like figuring out what to test, what is the least that you can do in order to like get information about this topic is something that is like very yeah, it is a forcing function. And I actually think that starting out with less money is better,
Mhm.
right? Because you're like, I it's more of a forcing function for you to test like the most important thing that is like the key driver of your business, of
Yeah.
like whether or not you even have a business, right? So I think that is one key difference from like working at a startup than working at a tech company. And I think that's also why a lot of tech companies are like large tech companies will like have like, you know, internal incubation for
Mhm.
startups or like, oh, we're building a startup within a big company. And a lot of times that doesn't work because there's too much time, there's too much money, there's too many resources. Like you need that like desperation
Yeah.
for it to work.
Necessity is
Um
the mother of invention. Heck yeah. And it's the reason why some of the most transformative companies came out of economic crises like Airbnb and Uber, et cetera.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about the non-software internet inventions that changed like our country, like a lot of it came from war, right?
Yeah.
Like after World War II, like that was a huge like technology boom, right? Because it's like so necessary to innovate, right? It's like a life or death situation.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the sort of physical technologies that we have in aerospace or, all of
Mhm.
these like in things that we take for granted now, like those even in medicine, right? Like came from like very difficult times.
Yeah.
And also the motherhood you
Yeah.
mentioned, like, is also a forcing function because all of a sudden you have, like, no time.
Yeah.
It's
I
like,
don't
oh,
even know how you do it. Can you help me wrap my head around what is your day
I'm just
even like,
into
Amy?
it. It's a lot of delegation, a lot of being very
Okay.
tired and, like, thinking that you can't do it, but then also just realizing that
And
a lot of people have kids, like,
mhm.
the majority of people have kids, and, like, if you wanna support female founders, you have to support founders who are mothers because most women are gonna go through this at some point in their life, and I think it also made me realize, like, what I was willing to sacrifice for my career and what I'm not willing to sacrifice, right? It's like, if like, what is at what expense, right? It's like, I'm not willing to give up, like,
Mhm.
my family,
Yeah.
and, like, this I love my sons so much, like, more than, like,
Yeah.
anything, and, like, yeah, of course, I'm not willing to give that up for like, more
Yeah.
money or, like,
And it's
a
so
career,
evident in
and
your smile and the twinkle in your
it's
eye right now as you're
yeah.
talking. If anyone's not watching it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
and other people have made it work, so
Yeah.
shout out to a mom founder group.
Yeah.
I found this mom founder group called VC Pack Moms, and it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's a lot of women are going through this. I think at first I thought I was like, "This is gonna be impossible." Like, there's no way that these 2 things, like, are compatible in any way, but a lot of women are doing it, and it is possible, and I think a lot of it is like, okay, can we pave the way? Can we change the narrative so that it's not something that, like, women feel discouraged by? And I've heard this a lot, as I'm trying to hire, I heard a lot of people say, like, "Oh, I don't wanna join a startup," or, "I don't wanna start a company
Mm.
because I want more stability, because I want to start a family." And I'm like, "Oh," like, in people's minds, these 2 things are just not compatible, but that's not true. Like, it is possible. It is very hard, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, if our parents could live in a one-bedroom apartment and, like, hustle through that, like, then I can start a company and have a baby. Like, he lives a better like, he has more, like
He has more
he has more
rooms than you
resources,
did.
he has more space, like, it is like, it's actually like, people have made it work for generations, and we can
Yeah.
make it work now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so much too of what I'm hearing in terms of how you're managing is I heard delegation, which is
Mhm.
easier said than done. I know so many startup founders just struggle with this, is feeling like their startup is their baby and they want to do everything themselves. But this is a huge, huge tip, folks. It's really important to delegate and bring your team along with you. So, curious, any tips for delegation for folks? And then I heard time, and I imagine just given your prioritization of your family and your kids, you probably are so much more efficient and effective in how you spend your time than most folks. I know in my experience, at least, the moms are they it's like an hour is like 5 hours of time. They get so much done
Oh my
in the
god.
same amount of time. So
Yeah,
tell
thinking
tell
that
us
free
about
time
that.
is precious. Yeah, I definitely think that, yeah, you realize that how precious, like, quote unquote free time is, or just your time in general. And in terms of delegation, I mean, my belief is that, as a startup founder, there's, like, actually a very small number of things that you do that will really matter and have a impact on the trajectory of your business. If you could spend your time thinking about those things, and they're usually the big decisions on the direction of the product, how you go to market, and all the other tasks that you fill up during your day. Do you
Mhm.
need to do those yourself? Does it like, are you even the best person to do that task at your
Yeah.
team? Like, oh, there's just so many, like, pieces of busy work. And I actually believe that a lot of that will be automated in time with AI. Maybe
Yeah.
in a shorter amount of time, than we think.
Yeah.
But, like, what are the most important things for you to do as a founder? I know it's different for every business, but it's like, yeah, the decision on what direction the team is going in and how we get there. The decisions of how you go to market. Maybe a lot of large customer sales are dependent on the founder and your relationships. But, like, everything else, like, do you really need to be in there, like, prioritizing tickets? Like, do you need to
Yeah.
be, you know, f- there's just, like, a lot of things that, like, someone else on your team could may probably be able to do better than you.
Mhm.
And that's okay. It's okay to let go of those things.
Yeah.
And I do think, like, a lot of times, like, as the founder, you think that you have to do it, but you don't, you know? And just you try and then see. Like, if sometimes you can delegate and it doesn't work out and you're like, "Oh, actually, I have to do this." But I
Mm,
think a lot of things you can, trust other people and they end up
totally.
doing a good job, and you can even outsource it, you can outsource it and, like, I know a lot of founders that outsource their inboxes or their calendars or,
Yeah.
everything in between.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know,
Lot
they're just
Lots
as
of
efficient.
resources.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes me think of better done than perfect, and sometimes when we push things off and off and off and off, maybe you just take them off your to-do list, in general, and, like, you're prioritizing the things that actually are moving the needle. Amy, this has been amazing. I wanna get you out of here soon, but I would love to have us wrap up with, given all we discussed, you're building Briefly, you're a mom, you're investing, VC moms, shout out, and we'll link Briefly in the comments for folks to check out. What's important to you these days? I feel like you're great at strategy and prioritization, so I'm so curious about your thoughts on this one.
So I've been thinking a lot about this, like, what is important to me these days? I think, I guess for the business that we are, adding as much value to our customers as we can. But for me, a priority for me personally is to,
Yeah.
like, spend a little bit of time for myself
Yeah.
because in the past year, I have not spent pretty much any time for myself between the baby and the company.
Mm,
So that's, like, a priority for me right now, like, finding some, like, time just to, I don't know, just to think about things and to remember the things that I really enjoy outside of momming and work,
yeah.
and, like, giving myself a little bit of a break because it's been a bit crazy, I guess
Yeah.
by the time this podcast airs, it will be a different time, but,
You
the
would have
last couple of weeks has been, pretty intense as a founder with all the
totally.
banking drama and with all and we were also, doing South by Southwest at the same time.
Yeah,
So
we
it
were.
was it's a lot of it's been a lot, and so sometimes, like, taking a little bit of time to
Mhm.
do things for myself,
Yeah,
is
and
important.
that's so helpful, right? It's like, as much about the recovery as in the work that we put in, and, like, just getting time to be a more balanced version of yourself allows you to bring so much more back to your son and your work and even your teammates. You're just a more whole, full version of yourself. I hope you get to find the time, rejig things around to be able to spend more time with Amy.
Thank you. I hope so too. I'll keep you posted.
Amazing. All right, Amy, this was lovely. We'll catch you next time.
Awesome. Have a great one.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave a review and share.